The screen of George's phone illuminated the darkness, casting an eerie glow across our bedroom. I hadn't meant to snoop, but the constant buzzing at 2 a.m. had roused me from sleep. Now, with trembling fingers, I scrolled through a conversation that threatened to shatter my world. "I miss you already," the message read. "Last night was incredible." My stomach lurched. This couldn't be happening. Not to us. Not after 30 years of marriage. I set the phone down, my mind reeling. How long had this been going on? Who was she? The questions swirled, each one more painful than the last. "Anna," George's groggy voice startled me. "What are you doing up?" I turned to face him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who's Sarah?" The silence that followed was deafening. George's face, illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our bedroom window, contorted into a mix of shock and guilt. "It's not what you think," he stammered, sitting up in bed. "Really?" I spat, my sadness quickly giving way to anger. "Because I think it's exactly what I think." "How long, George?" He ran a hand through his thinning hair, avoiding my gaze. "Anna, please, can we talk about this in the morning?" "No," I said firmly, standing up. "We're talking about this now. How long have you been cheating on me?" George sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayal. "Does she know about me? About the girls?" I asked, thinking of our 2 daughters sleeping down the hall. George nodded slowly. "She knows I'm married, yes." I laughed bitterly. "Well, isn't that just wonderful? At least you had the decency to tell your mistress about your family." "Anna, I'm sorry," George began, but I cut him off. "Save it," I snapped. "I don't want to hear your excuses right now." I grabbed my robe and headed for the door, needing to put some distance between us before I said something I couldn't take back. "Where are you going?" George called after me. "To sleep in the guest room," I replied without turning around. "I can't even look at you right now." As I made my way down the hall, I paused at our daughters' rooms. Lily, 25, and Rose, 22, were both home for the summer. How was I going to tell them their father had betrayed us all? I slipped into the guest room, closing the door behind me. As I sank onto the bed, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. How had we gotten here? Where had I gone wrong? My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me. It was a text from my sister-in-law, Lucy. "You up? I need to talk to you." I hesitated for a moment before replying. "Can't sleep? What's wrong?" The response came quickly. "I think Tom's cheating on me. Can we meet tomorrow?" My heart sank. Was this some sort of twisted family curse? "Of course," I typed back. "Coffee at 10, the usual place?" "Perfect. Thank you, Anna." I set the phone down, my mind racing. First George, now possibly Tom. What was happening to our family? As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I wouldn't let George's betrayal define me. I wouldn't let it destroy our family, but I also wouldn't let him get away with it. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Lucy. We'd compare notes, make a plan. And then, we'd show George and Tom exactly what happens when you mess with the women in this family. I closed my eyes, finally drifting off to sleep. In my dreams, I saw myself standing tall, surrounded by my daughters and sister-in-laws. We were strong, we were united, and we were ready for a fight. The next morning, I found myself at our usual coffee shop waiting for Lucy. My eyes were puffy from a sleepless night, and my hands shook as I clutched my latte. When Lucy walked in, I could see the same weariness etched on her face. "Anna," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Thank you for meeting me. I didn't know who else to turn to." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We're family, Lucy. We stick together." Lucy's eyes welled up with tears. "I found receipts," she whispered. "Expensive dinners, hotel rooms. Tom's been lying to me for months." My heart sank. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing my own pain reflected in Lucy's eyes. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I know exactly how you feel, George. He's been cheating on me, too." Lucy's eyes widened in shock. "George, but I thought—" "Oh, Anna, what are we going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my daughter, Rose. "Mom, can you come home? Grandma Eleanor's here and she's being awful." I groaned. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was the last person I wanted to deal with right now. "I'm sorry, Lucy. I have to go. Family emergency." Lucy nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Go. We'll talk later." I rushed home, my mind racing. What could Eleanor want? As I pulled into the driveway, I saw her sleek Mercedes parked out front. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and walked inside. The scene that greeted me made my blood boil. Eleanor was in the living room, fawning over a framed photo of her grandson, Tom and Lucy's boy, while completely ignoring the beautiful portraits of my girls on the mantel. "Anna, there you are," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I was just telling the girls how wonderful it would be if they could be more like their cousin. He's studying law at Harvard, you know?" I saw Rose and Lily exchange a look of hurt and anger. Lily, always the more outspoken of the two, stepped forward. "Grandma, I just got accepted into medical school. Isn't that worth celebrating, too?" Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that's nice, dear, but it's not quite the same as law school, is it?" I'd had enough. "Eleanor," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger, "my daughters are brilliant, accomplished young women. They don't need to be compared to anyone." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Well, if you'd raised them properly, maybe they'd have achieved more by now. It's a shame George didn't have any sons. The family name will die out with him." The room fell silent. I could see the shock and hurt on my daughters' faces. Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Eleanor looked stunned. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me," I said, stepping closer. "I will not stand here and let you belittle my children. Your grandson isn't better than them just because he's a boy. Now leave before I say something I might regret." Eleanor huffed, gathering her designer purse. "Well, I never. George will hear about this, mark my words." As she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I turned to my daughters. They both looked shell-shocked. "Mom," Rose said quietly, "what's going on? You've never stood up to Grandma like that before." I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "Girls, there's something I need to tell you. It's about your father." As I began to explain, I saw the hurt and betrayal bloom in their eyes. But beneath it, I saw something else too, a fierce determination that mirrored my own. In that moment, I knew, whatever came next, we'd face it together. The men in our lives might have let us down, but we had each other, and that was more than enough. The day after Eleanor's visit, I called an emergency meeting with Lucy and Margaret. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. "I can't believe this is happening to all of us," Margaret said, stirring her tea absently. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I knew she'd been crying. "What do you mean, all of us?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. Margaret took a shaky breath. "I found out last week. He's been seeing his secretary for months." Lucy and I exchanged a glance. 3 brothers, 3 affairs. It couldn't be a coincidence. "We need to do something," Lucy said, her voice low and determined. "We can't let them get away with this." I nodded, feeling a surge of anger. "You're right, but what?" We spent the next hour brainstorming, our voices growing more animated as we shared ideas. By the time we left the cafe, we had the beginnings of a plan. "Are you sure about this, Anna?" Lucy asked as we stood in the parking lot. "Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about George's betrayal, about Eleanor's disdain for my daughters, about the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect wife and mother. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "It's time we stood up for ourselves." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We gathered evidence, consulted lawyers, and prepared for the confrontation to come. Through it all, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my life. A week after our meeting, I was in the kitchen making dinner when George came home. He kissed me on the cheek, acting as if nothing had changed between us. "How was your day, dear?" he asked, reaching for a beer in the fridge. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "It was enlightening," I said carefully. "I had lunch with Lucy and Margaret." George froze, his hand on the fridge door. "Oh," he said, trying to sound casual. "How are they?" "Not good," I said, watching his face closely. "It seems your brothers have been keeping secrets, too." The color drained from George's face. "Anna, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, George," I snapped, my patience finally snapping. "I know about Sarah. I know about the affair, and I know about your brother's affairs, too." George stumbled back, shock written all over his face. How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice cold. "What matters is what happens next." Just then, the doorbell rang. George looked at me, confusion and fear in his eyes. "Who's that?" I smiled, a small, satisfied smile. "That would be Lucy and Margaret, and they're lawyers." George's eyes widened in panic. Lawyers? Anna, what have you done? What I should have done a long time ago, I said, walking past him to answer the door. I'm taking back control of my life. As I opened the door, I saw Lucy and Margaret standing there, determination etched on their faces. Behind them stood 3 stern-looking men in suits, our lawyers. Are you ready? Lucy asked, her voice steady. I nodded, feeling a surge of strength. More than ready. As we walked back into the kitchen, George's face paled even further. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. This was no longer just about his affair. This was about years of disrespect, of taking us for granted, of treating us like second-class citizens in our own families. George, I said, my voice ringing with newfound confidence, we need to talk. All of us. The look of fear on his face was almost satisfying. Almost. But I knew the real satisfaction would come when we finally got the justice and respect we deserved. As we all sat down at the kitchen table, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This was it. The moment everything would change. And I was ready for it. The tension in our kitchen was palpable as George sat across from me, flanked by our lawyers. Lucy and Margaret had left with their own legal counsel, ready to confront their husbands. Now, it was just George and me, the remnants of our 30-year marriage crumbling between us. Anna, George began, his voice strained, can't we discuss this privately? We don't need lawyers involved. I fixed him with a steely gaze. We're well past that point, George. You made sure of that when you decided to sleep with Sarah. His face flushed with anger. It was a mistake, okay? I'm sorry, but do you really want to throw away our entire marriage over one indiscretion? One? I laughed bitterly. Don't insult my intelligence. I know it's been going on for months. George's lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, I advise you not to say anything further without consulting me. I turned to my own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia. Show him what we found. Patricia pulled out a thick folder and slid it across the table. George's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Bank statements, hotel receipts, text message logs. The evidence of his betrayal laid bare. How did you get all this? He whispered, his face ashen. It doesn't matter, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. What matters is that it's over, George. I want a divorce. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. George slumped in his chair, defeated. Fine, he muttered, if that's what you want, but don't expect to take me for everything I'm worth. I built this life. I earned this money. I felt a surge of rage at his words. You built this life? I gave up my career to raise our daughters while you climbed the corporate ladder. I managed this household, supported your ambitions, put up with your mother's constant criticism. Don't you dare tell me I haven't earned my share. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. Mom, Grandma Eleanor is here. She's saying awful things about you and Dad. What's going on? My heart sank. Of course, Eleanor would get involved. I turned back to George, my resolve strengthening. Your mother is at our house right now, no doubt poisoning our daughters against me, I said, my voice cold. Is that part of your plan, too? George looked genuinely surprised. I didn't tell her anything, Anna. I swear. It doesn't matter, I said, standing up. I need to go home and deal with this. As I gathered my things, George reached out and grabbed my arm. Anna, please, can't we work this out, for the girls' sake? I jerked my arm away, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. You should have thought about the girls before you started cheating, George. It's too late now. I left him sitting there, looking lost and broken. Part of me ached to comfort him, to fall back into the familiar patterns of our marriage. But I squashed that impulse. I had to be strong for myself and for my daughters. As I drove home, my mind raced. How much had Eleanor told the girls? How would I explain everything to them? And what would our future look like now, with the family torn apart? I pulled into our driveway, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. Through the living room window, I could see Eleanor gesticulating wildly, her face twisted with anger. Lily and Rose sat on the couch, looking shell-shocked. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. It was time to face the music, to stand up not just to George, but to Eleanor and all the years of subtle put-downs and gender bias she represented. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Whatever happened next would change our lives forever. but for the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my destiny. I opened the door, ready to fight for my daughters, my dignity, and our future. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a chill in the air that matched the icy tension in our home. As I prepared the turkey, my hands trembled slightly. Today was the day. The day I would shatter the facade of our perfect family. Lucy and Margaret arrived early, their faces a mix of determination and fear. We huddled in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. "Are you sure about this, Anna?" Lucy whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards the living room, where our husbands sat, oblivious to the storm about to break. I nodded, my jaw set. "It's now or never. We can't live like this anymore." The doorbell rang, announcing Eleanor's arrival. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. As we gathered around the dining table, the air was thick with unspoken words. George sat at the head, carving the turkey with practiced ease, as if our world wasn't about to implode. "Well," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "isn't this lovely? All of us together, although it would be nicer if we had some grandsons at the table." I saw Lily and Rose exchange a pained look. That was the final straw. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. All eyes turned to me. "Anna?" George asked, confusion etched on his face. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done a long time ago," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm telling the truth." Eleanor scoffed. "What on earth are you talking about?" I turned to face her, years of pent-up frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'm talking about the way you've always favored boys over girls, the way you've made my daughters feel less than, and I'm talking about your son's infidelity." A collective gasp went around the table. George's face paled. "George has been having an affair," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "and he's not the only one. Tom and David have been unfaithful, too." Lucy and Margaret stood up, flanking me in a show of solidarity. "It's true," Lucy said, her voice shaking slightly. "We've all been betrayed." The room erupted into chaos. Eleanor was shouting, George was stammering excuses, and our children looked shell-shocked. "Enough," I yelled, silencing the room. "I've made my decision. I'm filing for divorce." George jumped to his feet. "Anna, please, we can work this out." "No, we can't," I cut him off. "You've made your choices, George. Now I'm making mine." Eleanor turned on me, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful woman, after everything this family has done for you." "Done for me?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean belittled me, made me feel worthless, treated my daughters like second-class citizens?" I turned to Lily and Rose, who were watching with wide eyes. "Girls, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But I want you to know that you are valued, you are loved, and you are more than enough, just as you are." Tears welled up in their eyes as they nodded, understanding dawning on their faces. "This is ridiculous," Eleanor sputtered. "George, are you going to let her speak to me this way?" But George remained silent, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. This facade of a perfect family ends now. We're done pretending. As I looked around the table at the shocked faces of our family, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years I felt truly free. "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone," I said, my voice laced with irony. "I think it's time we all went home." As the family began to disperse, murmuring in shocked whispers, I caught Lucy and Margaret's eyes. They nodded, a silent agreement passing between us. We had taken the first step. There was no going back now. I watched as George slumped in his chair, head in his hands. Part of me ached for the man I had loved for so long, but a stronger part knew this was necessary. For me, for my daughters, and for all the women who had been silenced for too long. The facade had shattered. Now it was time to rebuild. The aftermath of our Thanksgiving revelation was like the eye of a hurricane, a deceptive calm before the real storm hit. I spent the next few days in a daze, fielding calls from shocked relatives and comforting my daughters. But I knew the worst was yet to come. A week after Thanksgiving, Lucy, Margaret, and I met at our lawyer's office. As we sat around the polished oak table, the gravity of our situation settled over us like a heavy blanket. "Ladies," our lawyer Patricia began, "I've reviewed your cases. I won't sugarcoat it. This won't be easy. Your husbands are powerful men with considerable resources." I felt a flicker of doubt, but quickly squashed it. "We're prepared for a fight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Lucy nodded, her face set with determination. We've been silent for too long. It's time to stand up for ourselves. Just then, Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her brow furrowing. It seems your husbands have made a preemptive move. They're calling a family meeting at Eleanor's house. Tonight. My stomach dropped. Eleanor's house, the lion's den. I exchanged worried glances with Lucy and Margaret. We don't have to go, Margaret said, her voice trembling slightly, but I knew we did. No, we need to face this head-on. We can't let them control the narrative. As we pulled up to Eleanor's sprawling mansion that evening, I felt a mix of dread and determination. The three of us walked in together, a united front against whatever awaited us inside. The scene that greeted us was like something out of a twisted family drama. George, Tom, and David sat on one side of the room, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. Eleanor presided over the gathering from her ornate armchair, looking like a queen about to pass judgment. "Well, well," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The prodigal daughters-in-law return." I stepped forward, refusing to be intimidated. "We're here to talk, Eleanor. That's all." George stood up, his face pleading. "Anna, please, can't we discuss this privately? We can work things out." Before I could respond, Lucy's voice rang out, clear and strong. "There's nothing to discuss, Tom. I've already filed for divorce." The room erupted into chaos. David lunged at Margaret, grabbing her arm. "You can't do this to me," he shouted. I watched in horror as Margaret stumbled, fear flashing across her face. Something inside me snapped. "Enough," I roared, my voice cutting through the din. "This ends now. We're not your property. We're not here to be controlled or manipulated." Eleanor rose from her chair, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful women, after everything this family has given you." "Given us?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the constant criticism? The belittling of our daughters? The blind eye to your son's infidelities?" I turned to face George, Tom, and David. "We trusted you. We loved you. And you betrayed us in the worst possible way." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Then, to my shock, a slow clap started from the doorway. We all turned to see Lily and Rose standing there, pride shining in their eyes. "Well said, Mom," Lily said, her voice strong. "It's about time someone stood up to this toxic family dynamic." Eleanor sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "How dare you?" But Rose cut her off. "No, Grandma. How dare you? How dare all of you treat our mothers this way?" As I looked at my daughters, standing tall and unafraid, I felt a surge of pride and strength. This was why we were fighting. This was what it was all about. I turned back to face the room, my resolve stronger than ever. "We're done being silent. We're done playing by your rules. From now on, we make our own path." The tension in the room was palpable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. I knew that whatever happened next would change our lives forever, but as I stood there, flanked by my daughters and sister-in-laws, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. We were stronger together, and we were ready for whatever storm was about to break. The morning after our confrontation at Eleanor's house, I woke to a flurry of missed calls and text messages. My phone buzzed incessantly as I scrolled through them, my heart racing with each notification. "Anna, we need to talk. Please." George. "You'll regret this, all of you." Eleanor. "Mom, are you okay? Call us." Lily. But the message that made my blood run cold came from our lawyer, Patricia. "Emergency meeting, 9 a.m. Your husbands are trying to freeze your assets." I sprang into action, calling Lucy and Margaret as I threw on clothes. Within an hour, we were huddled in Patricia's office, the gravity of our situation weighing heavily on us. "They're playing dirty," Patricia said, her voice grim. "They filed for emergency orders to restrict your access to joint accounts, properties, everything." Lucy gasped, her face pale. "Can they do that?" Patricia nodded. "They're claiming your flight risks, that you might try to hide or spend the money before the divorce proceedings." I felt a surge of anger. "That's ridiculous. We've done nothing wrong." "I know," Patricia said, "but we need to act fast. We have a hearing this afternoon. The judge will decide whether to grant their request." As we left Patricia's office, my phone buzzed again. It was George. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Anna, please." His voice was desperate. "Let's talk about this. We can work it out." I felt a flicker of doubt, remembering the good times we'd shared. But then I thought of his betrayal, of Eleanor's constant belittling, of the years I'd spent feeling less than. "It's too late, George," I said, my voice steady. "You've made your choices. Now I'm making mine." The courthouse was a flurry of activity as we arrived. Our husbands were there, looking smug in their expensive suits. Eleanor sat behind them, her face a mask of disdain. As the hearing began, I felt a knot of fear in my stomach. What if the judge sided with them? What if we lost everything we'd worked for? But as our lawyer presented our case, I felt a surge of pride. We weren't the villains here. We were women standing up for ourselves, for our children, for our futures. The judge listened intently, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words sent a shockwave through the courtroom. "I'm denying the request for asset freezing," he said. "There's no evidence of any intention to hide or misuse funds. Furthermore," he continued, fixing our husbands with a stern gaze, "I'm ordering a full financial audit of all parties involved." I watched as the color drained from George's face. From the corner of my eye, I saw Tom and David exchange panicked looks. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and trepidation. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. Eleanor cornered us in the hallway, her face twisted with fury. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "This isn't over. You'll never get away with this." I stood tall, meeting her gaze. "No, Eleanor, you're right. It's not over, but we're not backing down." Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rose. "Mom, there are reporters outside our house. They're asking about Dad's company. What's going on?" My heart sank. I looked at Lucy and Margaret, seeing my own fear reflected in their eyes. What had we stumbled into? As we hurried out of the courthouse, dodging reporters and flashing cameras, I realized we were standing on the precipice of something much bigger than we'd anticipated. Our fight for justice had uncovered a web of deceit that went far beyond our marriages. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. We'd started this fight for ourselves, for our daughters. Now, it seemed, we were fighting for something much larger. As we climbed into the car, I turned to Lucy and Margaret. "Are you ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, determination etched on their faces. Whatever storm was coming, we'd face it together. The tables had turned, and there was no going back now. 1 year after that fateful Thanksgiving, I stood in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict in our divorce proceedings. Lucy and Margaret flanked me, our hands clasped tightly together. Across the aisle, George, Tom, and David sat with their lawyers, their faces a mix of anger and defeat. As the judge began to speak, I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. This wasn't just about the end of our marriages. It was about reclaiming our lives, our dignity, and our futures. "In light of the evidence presented," the judge said, her voice clear and firm, "this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs. The divorce settlements will proceed as outlined, including equal division of assets and full custody of the children to the mothers." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. I turned to Lucy and Margaret, tears of relief and joy streaming down our faces. We'd done it. We'd won. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she continued, "in light of the financial irregularities uncovered during these proceedings, I'm recommending a full investigation into the business practices of Thompson Industries." I watched as the color drained from George's face. The web of deceit we'd uncovered went far beyond our marriages. It had exposed years of corporate fraud and mismanagement. As we left the courthouse, a crowd of reporters surged forward. But it was Lily and Rose who pushed through first, enveloping me in a tight hug. "We're so proud of you, Mom," Lily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Rose nodded, her eyes shining. "You showed us what real strength looks like." Over their shoulders, I caught sight of Eleanor, standing alone at the edge of the crowd. For a moment, our eyes met. I expected to see anger or hatred, but instead I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes: respect. In the months that followed, our lives transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Lucy, Margaret, and I bought a sprawling house together, creating a new kind of family filled with laughter, love, and unwavering support. Our children thrived in this new environment. Lily pursued her medical career with renewed vigor, inspired by the strength she'd seen in us. Rose started a support group for children of divorce, turning our family's pain into a force for good. Even Eleanor surprised us. One day, she showed up at our door, her usual haughty demeanor replaced by a hesitant vulnerability. I was wrong, she said simply. About everything. I'd like to be a part of your lives if you'll have me. It wasn't easy, but slowly, we began to rebuild those bridges. Eleanor became a regular fixture at our family dinners, her previous disdain for her granddaughters replaced by genuine interest and affection. As for George and his brothers, they faced the consequences of their actions. The investigation into Thompson Industries revealed years of financial misdeeds. The company crumbled, taking their fortunes and reputations with it. One evening, as we all sat around our large dining table, Lucy, Margaret, our children, and even Eleanor, I looked around and felt a surge of gratitude. We'd been through hell, but we'd come out stronger on the other side. You know, Lucy said, raising her glass, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for what we went through. Look at what we've built. Margaret nodded, her eyes misty. We're more than just survivors. We're thrivers. As we clinked our glasses together, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We'd redefined what family meant. We'd shown our children the power of resilience, the strength of women standing together. Our story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about transformation, about rising from the ashes of betrayal and building something beautiful and strong. As I looked at the faces of these women, my sisters in all but blood, and our children, I knew that whatever challenges life might throw our way, we'd face them together. We were unbreakable, and in that moment, I realized that this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. The start of a new chapter, filled with hope, love, and the unbreakable bonds of our chosen family.